tell us who you are.
I'm Jim Carrigan.
And where do you live?
2350 Denison Lane, Boulder, Colorado.
And can you tell us how you got here?
From where I came, you mean? Well, all the way. I was born in South Dakota.
Okay, go ahead. That's a good beginning.
Little town called Mobridge, South Dakota. My father was a baker there. And when the Depression came, he lost his bakery. And we moved several times to Bismarck, North Dakota, living in a basement there with 5 children and my mom and dad. He worked nights in a bakery for almost no money. I think he got about $35 a week or something like that. And after several years there, he moved to another bakery in Marmarth, North Dakota, which was a tiny little place, but it was a railroad town. And the railroad people would stop there to get water and coal, and everybody would get off the trains and they'd come and buy from our bakery. In those days, the CCC boys were working all around the country, and they were paid a little bit of money, and they'd be on these trains, so they'd all come over to the bakery and buy donuts and rolls and cookies and things like that.
Did you play a role in the bakery?
I worked in the bakery from the time I was a very young child.
What did you do at the bakery?
Well, those were cold days, so one thing I did is I shoveled off all the snow and stuff off the front of the sidewalks, and I did whatever they told me to do. I'd sugar the donuts and help with the wrapping of the bread and rolls and so forth like that.
If we were in a court of law and we were qualifying you as an expert, or your background, how would you express your professional life, your educational background, papers you published and things like that?
Well, I attended the University of North Dakota and also the University of North Dakota Law School. They were very, very good to me and treated me extremely well. I was editor-in-chief of the Law Review there, and had my first job with a very good law firm in Williston, North Dakota, which is in northwestern corner of North Dakota, where they had discovered a lot of oil. And these two guys came there and started a firm to have oil and gas lawyers. That was my first job, and I worked there for a couple of years, I guess. And decided I was never going to find a girl to marry there in that little town. So I left there. Can you stop this?
Yes.
No.
Well, we got you in Williston, North Dakota. We got you into law school. We got you on the Law Review, editor-in-chief, and so on.
Well, I
and
practiced.
You went to a law firm and did oil and gas work.
That's right. And from there,
He'd been offered a scholarship to go.
I realized that I probably would never find in that little town somebody I really wanted to marry to for life. So I took a fellowship to go and do graduate work at NYU Law School, and taught there part-time while I was getting my master's degree in tax law.
What did you teach?
I taught basic beginning courses for students, legal research and writing and that sort of thing.
Okay, and where did you go from New York? Well, why don't you jump to Colorado if you like, Jim?
What's that?
Why don't you jump to Colorado and tell us a bit about your career in Colorado?
Yeah, after a few more stops, I was very, very lucky to come to Colorado. Larry Long.
Oh wait, how did you get invited here?
Wasn't that Larry Long? Who was it?
Byron White.
Oh, that's right.
That's a great story.
Yeah, that's right. A terrific lawyer in the firm of Davis, Graham, and Stubbs in Denver invited me to come from New York to his law firm to be a tax lawyer there. And I did that for a while.
You interviewed you.
That's right, I can go back now.
The issue was that the man who was the head of the tax department at NYU had known Byron White in their days at Yale. And so he said, send me your best student. So Jim came out here. Can you remember why you didn't go with Byron White?
I didn't want to be
Okay.
Thank you, Bev. That was Bev,
Yeah.
Jim's wife, who talked on the tape. She's going to help us during this
No,
interview.
I don't want to help. I want it
Okay.
to be his story.
Her name is Halpin.
Okay.
So I came out to Denver and interviewed several law firms, including Byron White's firm, Davis, Graham, and Stubbs, which was really one of the great old law firms in Colorado. I was afraid if I went into a gigantic law firm like that, they had 12 lawyers, for God's sakes, I would be stuck there for life. And so I joined two guys, Larry Long and Tom Smart, who were insurance defense lawyers. And I always wanted to be in court a lot, so that was an opportunity for me to be in court, more than I would have been as a tax lawyer. What's next?
Well, you had a career as a practicing attorney. You practiced law for a number of years.
Right.
Then what was your next career?
Well, while I was practicing, I was asked to teach part-time at the University of Denver Law School. And so I taught there. They had night classes. Taught there for some years, and ultimately joined the faculty as a full-time professor. I think I was there for, 4 or 5 years.
And what subjects did you teach?
Well, I taught just about everything. Everything they asked me to teach. It was kind of a moving program. Of course, tax was one of the main things I taught there. But I taught torts and future interests, and property, a lot of different courses.
Let's come back to your legal career. Let's talk a bit about your family, Jim.
Yes.
Okay. Who did you marry and when did you marry? At least who did you marry?
I married a beautiful young woman I met in New York City named Beverly Halpin. And we were married, and we were married before we came to Denver, weren't we, Bev?
Yes, we got married in Los Angeles in 1956. You came here.
We were married in Los Angeles in 1956. She was from Los Angeles, but had taken her master's degree in New York City. And we lived very modestly in the little rented areas with upstairs, lots of stairs to go up to the apartment. We were very happy. And I believe that at that point I was working with Long and Smart. I went back to New York after agreeing to join them, and one of my mentors there, older professor, asked, "What's the name of the law firm?" And I said, "Oh, it's simple. It's Long and Smart." And he said, "Simple, Long and Smart? They've made you the leading partner already."
You left that.
His name was Elmer Million. He was from Oklahoma.
What happened next?
Well, I practiced law with them, for several years at least, right? No, what happened?
Jim was teaching at the law school at DU for $4,000 a year,
Or at DU.
and he tried to get a salary increase up to $5,000. And I remember the Chancellor Alter refused it.
Right.
So Jim just uprooted the family and we went off to Seattle, where
Right.
he was the belle of the ball and I lived in a Quonset hut with 2 babies and pregnant with the 3rd one. It was a rough year and a half.
You want me to say all that?
No, that's fine. We got it.
Got it.
And
He
so,
came back
go right ahead.
administrator.
What?
Okay, you came back to Colorado, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Remember what you were then the court administrator?
I think that was next.
And what does a court
I was
administrator...
the second state court administrator of Colorado.
What does a court administrator do?
Court administrator is the guy who is in charge of managing the entire court system, from the lowest county courts to the intermediate court of appeals, not the Supreme Court, and working under the Supreme Court. So I would travel all around the state trying to modernize and bring up to date the methods that were being used in the trial courts. State court administrator systems were just then coming on board nationally. I got to travel a great deal with this beautiful state. Enjoyed that very much.
I'll bet you did. Where did you go from being the administrator of the courts? Well, you probably came to Boulder at some point, didn't you?
I can't remember where.
That's there. Well,
I think I joined the law faculty at CU on a part-time basis,
that moved you to Boulder.
and that brought me to Boulder, and then they made me full-time. So I was on the law faculty at the University of Colorado for some years. I taught a lot of courses, which I liked. I didn't want to get caught in one course.
Why don't you tell us about the house you're living in now, Jim?
Well, this house, let's see, how long have we been here, Ben?
We built it in 1969.
Okay.
We lived in the other house in 1963.
Okay, so we had a small house from 1963, and in 1969 we built this house, which is a lovely house on a hillside with views all around, and we have enjoyed it very, very much. We raised 6 children here.
Did you design the house or did you have an architect? Or both?
Well, we had a builder who was a very close friend of ours,
Who was that?
David Stainton.
Go ahead.
This was the first private residence that McStain built. David Stainton was a friend and neighbor of ours, and when he bought Horizon Homes, it became McStain. He was in with a relative by marriage, and so it was McClintock and Stainton, so it became McStain that everyone knows today. And we were fortunate. We bought 2 lots. So we have an acre of land in the middle of Boulder with a seasonal creek
Hilltop.
on a little street that only has 13 houses, unobstructed views, wildlife, everything from bears to fox to skunk to, of course, the damn deer. That's one word. And we built the house in '69. We remodeled up in about 82 or so and brought up 6 children and still live in the house. It has about 5,000 square feet. It's very big. Even has a wine cellar.
Where's the wine cellar?
We won't
It's
tell
right
you.
next to the kitchen. It's very convenient for the cook.
And for those who drink.
Tell us about your children, Jim.
Well, there are 6 of them. Sheila is the oldest. She is a very active trial lawyer in Boulder. Moira, the second one, is a nurse and has worked in hospitals and for doctors. Still works part-time. Next is Patrick. Patrick is a lawyer. He's not practicing right now. Let's see. Who's after Pat?
Kathleen.
Oh, yeah. Kathleen was next. She's living in Florida and has a boy there. And Michael is the youngest.
Andrew.
Oh, Andrew, of course, yeah. We adopted Andrew, and he's just wonderful. He's a, God, how do you describe what he does? He's a broker, really, very successful.
Andrew is the senior vice president at Morgan Stanley in
Fresno, California.
And we adopted Andrew from Catholic Charities, and he was considered unadoptable, which is kind of a joke, but he had been adopted and then they'd removed him and placed him in foster care. And he was 14 months old when we got him. And when we brought him home, we found out that Bev was pregnant again. So we had, they're 20 months apart. We ended up with 3 boys and 3 girls. The last child is Michael, and Jim will brag on him.
How's that?
Well, Michael is a partner in Holland Hart in Denver. He is also a regent of the University of Colorado. He's very, very active in Democratic politics, which is good for us, and very bright, very outgoing. He has a lovely wife and 2 children. They're doing fine.
Were you active in politics, Jim?
I was before I became a judge.
In what way?
Well, I was Democratic chairman of Boulder County, and I didn't run for office, so I did. Well, for the Board of Regents. Of course, I ran statewide for the Board of Regents
And were you
of the
elected?
University of Colorado and won, naturally.
Do you remember an issue or two that you struggled with when you were in Regent at Colorado? At Colorado University?
Not anything really deep struggle, no. I was more liberal than anybody else in the board.
Football is often a hot topic for the Regents. Did you get involved in that?
Not particularly. I'm a football fan, but football was not a driving force in my Board of Regents years.
Prior to him becoming regent, however, he was hired by the Board of Regents to do an investigation of a football coach. And this was Sonny Grandelius, and this would have been, I would think, the early 60s, because we were living in Denver, and he went away over Christmas time, and what he was doing was talking to individual families in the Chicago, Waukegan area. I remember the railroads were frozen, the planes weren't flying, and he had to go into these poor minority families and talk to them about the deals that the boosters and the coaches had promised. And
They were paying money under the table
to the families.
to persuade the family to choose the University of Colorado football team instead of some other one.
And so subsequently there was a big brouhaha in the
They fired the coach.
papers, and yeah, but that was a football story, and they keep going on, don't they? Jim's also had quite an illustrious career suing the Denver Police Department. He did that more than once.
I was very active in the ACLU and represented people who had been beaten by the police department and sued them in federal district court. Al Raj was the judge of those cases, And he didn't believe when the cases started it could be that bad, but luckily we had juries. And the juries believed what had happened to these people. And I obviously we got them money, awards of money.
What did happen to them? What did the police do to them?
Well, they would arrest them and they would beat them to get information out of them, or just beat them for the hell of it.
Were the victims of the police department a minority group, belonging to a minority?
Nobody on the police department at that point that I dealt with was a minority.
But
the minorities were the victims.
And were they generally black, or Spanish speaking, or?
Probably both Hispanics and blacks. There were more Hispanics in Denver than blacks.
There was a famous case of a Polish immigrant, Paul Labiak, which was the first time that the police department had been successfully defeated, and they had to pass the hat among the cops.
Yeah, we went to trial
because there was no insurance.
Went to trial before a jury on the Paul Labiak case. Paul had come over here from Poland, and he had been very much abused by the Germans in World War II and by the Russians after the Germans got done with him. And he was basically a slave laborer. And to avoid that, he got to the United States. He could not speak English, but he got a job in a factory and was making a living and doing all right. He had a tiny little house. And I remember the cops came down there on a Saturday morning. They wanted to arrest him for something. And so I went down there. And what had happened is that it was a beautiful April morning on a Saturday, and all these little, trying to think of the name of the part of Denver with these little 25-foot lots, little houses, very modest. Gloveville. And Paul did not want to go with the police, and they began to beat him with their sticks. He wrapped his arms around the posts on the front porch, and they had him hit him on the head, and they really beat him up and dragged him across the streets. And it was a Saturday morning in April, and a lot of the neighbors were out doing their lawns and so forth, and they saw this going on. So when I got into the case, I came back and got statements from all of those neighbors of what they had seen. They were the salt of the earth. And in a jury case, you can't do any better than that. And I won the case, got a verdict of, what, $30,000, something like that. They didn't give a lot of money in those days, but nobody else had ever beat the police department. And so I was kind of marked as the person to hire when you wanted to sue the cops. And of course, the cops didn't like me very much, but I didn't like them too much either.
Any other cases you remember from that time?
Oh boy, so many cases.
I think that disc will help.
I can't think of them right now, but I'm sure I had lots of them. I had a lot of personal injury cases, major personal injury cases. I liked them very much. I did a lot of medical malpractice, which nobody wanted to touch. And I was able to persuade some of the doctors out at the University Medical Center to look over the case and tell me whether it was a legitimate case or not. And when they did, then they would be willing to testify, which did not make them very popular, but they were doing the right thing, because they wanted to get these bad doctors off the street.
How did you move from being a trial lawyer and a professor to being a judge? Your first judgeship was where? Colorado Supreme Court?
My
Supreme
husband
Court.
became a Colorado Supreme Court justice at age 49, which I might say was very young for a justice. But I think the real reason that he got this appointment was because he had campaigned just a couple years earlier in the big rout of, was it 76? Or was it 74? Anyway, it was with Gary Hart was running for the Senate, and Dick Lamb was running for governor, and Jim was running for regent, even though it was a great difference in all those. But there was all statewide offices, so they would wander around. They'd end up at the same thing in Lamar or Grand Junction
or Saturday
Sterling.
nights.
A lot of picnics, covered dishes. And Jim was Governor Lamb's very first appointment to the Colorado Supreme Court, and he was by far the youngest and still the only one. I think one of the great stories about Jim Carrigan is that all the lawyers in the state of Colorado have registration numbers. They're up into the 30,000s or more by now. And Jim Carrigan holds number 36. The reason he got that, well, he was on the Supreme Court at the time, and his buddy, the Chief Justice, I'm sure, arranged for all his loyal friends to get the low numbers.
Eddie Pringle, wasn't it?
It was Justice Edward Pringle, yeah, at the time. But from there, you weren't there that long, and then the appointment came open for the Federal District Court, and by that time, Gary Hart was in the Senate. And there was another senator, Bill Armstrong, who objected mightily to Jim Carrigan. And there's a lot of publicity at the time when he was trying to hold up his nomination.
I was too liberal for him.
I'm sure you were. I'm sure you were. But that made a big brouhaha. And then you finally went on that bench in what year? Let's see.
Do you remember what year you went on the federal
I do
district
not
bench?
know.
And did you retire from the federal district bench?
Yes,
He was there 16 years.
And you were there about 16 years.
correct.
And so you would commute from this house to the federal courthouse every day that you were sat on the bench?
You had to drive down there every day, yeah. Which is, I would have stayed if I didn't have to drive down there every day. I tried to get them to have a courthouse, federal courthouse in Boulder, and they came very close at one point. But something happened with the financing of it.
It was all clear for them to be in the old courthouse right down on the mall. They had the room and the space. And the county commissioners, everybody was going along with this. And then the federal government said it wasn't grand enough for a U.S. district judge, and so they rejected it. So the only place in the state of Colorado where federal judges sit is Denver, which means nobody in the southern or the western slope. Everyone has to come to Denver. Most states are nothing like that. They're diverse all over. But no, it came very close to having one here because at that time there were 3 federal judges, Dick
Who lived
Mage
here?
and Zeta and you, and I think Babcock. And so there could have been a good use of that space, but I don't think it'll ever happen again.
And they all had to drive to Denver.
Right. Of course, Dick Mage always took the bus.
It,
It still does to this day in 2011.
but that's time they could be using on their cases instead of driving.
Do you remember any high-profile cases, or what cases do you remember that were high-profile cases when you were sitting as a federal district judge?
I don't.
Well, they kind of go from one extreme to the other. He actually had some nuns and Quakers that were accused of defacing federal property because they cut some barriers down around Rocky Flat. They cut the barbed wire. And the federal government maintained that they had stolen some federal land, some federal possession. And they brought in a big piece of barbed wire as evidence into the court. And Jim ruled that if the federal government hadn't cut the big pieces out, all they would have had to do was retie the wire and everything would have been fine. This was in the days of the protests that we had all over the state, and especially against, it was a peace movement during the Vietnam War. And I remember that very distinctly. The other one was a TV personality called Phil Donahue. And he had a father that had taken his child away from the mom, and it was, you know, an ugly divorce settlement. And he had the father on his television program, and at the same time his staff was babysitting the child, and the mother had no idea where her baby was, and then she saw this television program and saw this man being lionized, father's rights or whatever the issue was, I don't recall. But the mother then sued Donahue because Donahue had her baby in control and didn't contact anyone, and it went to court, and it happened to end up in Jim's court because it was a Denver case. So that was very high profile.
It was like a kidnapping charge.
And
How was that decided?
you know, Donahue lost. I mean, the child did go back to the mother, and it was traced back and found. And then the mother did recover money from the Donahue production company for doing this particular issue. And Jim had a lot of drug cases, and I remember the only twice we had federal marshals live with us, or stay with us. They didn't exactly live with us. And they came when Jim was threatened. And the people that would threaten him would be the tax protesters and the posse comitatus. And they would maintain that, you know, they didn't have to pay taxes and the whole world was illegal. And they would make threats to Jim. So the marshals would come and they'd stay up at the house. They'd eat us out of house and home. I remember...
They'd stay overnight.
Oh, yeah. I remember they would complain because we turned the heat down. I didn't even think about the poor man. But once Jim was quite a runner, and he had run up Encar Hill on a regular basis. And this poor guy, all he had was loafers, and he had to run right behind Jim as Jim was trotting up the hill. Another time we were at a CU basketball game, and the marshal came and sat with us, and the campus police came down during the middle of the game and wanted to be sure we were very secure, and the cops would come around. We all know they don't come around very much in Boulder, especially Table Mesa. But when they got the word from the FBI, they would come. They would come. And then you can talk about JAG.
What?
Your years at JAG
Yeah.
after you left the court.
You retired from the federal district court. Did you have any other employment after that?
After that, I joined a group called JAG, Judicial Arbiter Group, which was a alternative to going to court in order to try to settle cases. And that's still very, very active. But I was in on that pretty much close to the beginning, not right at the beginning. It was started by Dick Dana and Bill Bill Neighbors, who both had been students of mine in law school. And they're still doing very, very well.
16 years. Jim did this for 16 years, so again, he was commuting to downtown Denver. And
But being paid a lot more.
well, Yeah, he decided not to be a senior judge. I think one of the reasons was the sentencing guidelines that you had at the time, right?
Right, yeah. Sentencing guidelines were rather restrictive in taking away much of the sentencing choices of the judges, and I found that...
By choices, you mean judicial discretion?
Yeah,
You had
right.
less discretion as to how to sentence the
Right.
defendant?
But the guidelines kind of pinned you down.
Could you give us an example of that?
No, I really can't this time.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Okay.
I guess my basic philosophy was one of allowing the greatest freedom for people that we can within a country like ours and enforcing that freedom and being always on the guard
Yes.
for people who do not have the opportunity to defend themselves and their own freedoms.
Yeah. Thank you. Love you.
I guess my philosophy of life is to try to do as much good as I can and to avoid harming other people as much as I can, to enjoy the beauty around us, the beauty of nature, the beauty of other people, and to try to create and invigorate within the system the whole social system, the whole political system. I very much enjoyed my time in democratic politics, which probably not everybody would appreciate.
Well, you had a great career, and we appreciate your sharing that with us. Bev, since you're here, why don't you give us your philosophy of life?
Oh. I think it's very important to be grateful every day, and they say that grateful people are the happiest people. And I believe those of us who live in this beautiful community that's so safe and physically attractive and very welcoming, we probably just think the rest of the world is like this too often. In our hearts we don't know it, but you have to be grateful for your family, all the chances you've had, every day's little experiences.
Let me add one thing. From the time I was a little child, I had terrible asthma. And where I lived in Minnesota, it was very difficult. So every summer I would hitchhike out to Los Angeles or New Mexico or Arizona and get a job somewhere, and then come back to the University of North Dakota in the fall. And I've really been so lucky to live in a place like Boulder where I can be healthy and active and involved, and it's such a beautiful community. It's so full of creative people, and I was so fortunate to have taught at 4 different universities in 4 very good law schools, because from where I came from, a town of 1,200 people, not very many people get those opportunities. My dad was a baker, and my mother worked in the bakery as well. All of us kids worked in the bakery. Every morning when I went to school, I would do all the deliveries to the stores and restaurants in town before I could go to school. I'd be up in the morning at 4 or 5 in the morning cooking, frying donuts and putting the icing on cakes and that sort of thing before I went to school. The whole family worked very hard, and I thought that was a great asset for me. I did not resent that at all. Of course, we knew everybody in town.
Well, that's very good. We certainly thank you, Jim, and you too, Bev, for what you had to say today.
You're welcome.
Okay, and that's the end of this tape.
Now, I hope you're going to